This podcast is about names and formulas of binary ionic compounds. And binary means that it has two elements, two atoms. So the basic idea of making binary names and formulas, first, the order of the ions, the cation comes first, and then the anion. And remember that the cation is almost always going to be the metal, and then the anion is going to be a nonmetal. First, figure out the formula. The total charge has to add up to 0 in a formula. So if we look at calcium and bromine, calcium we know from the periodic table is going to be +2 because it's in group 2A. Bromine is a halogen, 7A, and it's going to have a charge of -1. But these don't add up to 0, so in order to make them add up to 0, we're going to need 2 bromines, each with a -1, to balance out the calcium, which has a +2. So if you have 1 calcium +2, 2 bromines, each with -1, then altogether they do add up to 0, which is what they have to do. So therefore we write the formula CaBr2, and the little 2, the subscript 2, means that I have 2 bromine anions. It doesn't mean the charge, it's the number of the ions. You're not allowed to put the charges inside the formula. So CaBr2, I don't have any pluses and minuses showing. They're there, but you're not allowed to write them in the formula. So let's look at magnesium and oxygen. Magnesium's +2 and oxygen's -2. Already, one of each of these is going to add up to 0. So the formula is not going to have any subscripts. So 1 magnesium plus 1 oxygen is the formula. It's the empirical formula. An empirical formula is the simplest ratio. You can also get the formula by crisscrossing the numbers of the charges. So if you do that, magnesium has a 2, oxygen has a 2, and those numbers end up on subscripts for the other ions. So the 2 on magnesium is the subscript on oxygen. The 2 on oxygen is the subscript on magnesium. And if you crisscross, you get Mg2O2, which adds up to 0, but it's not the simplest ratio. So then you have to simplify to get the formula. You can either get it by crisscrossing or by adding up the ions. It's the same, it's going to get you to the same place. Crisscrossing can be a nice shortcut though. So for practice, I've given you some atoms. You need to first, using the periodic table, figure out what ions they're going to make, and then put them together to make a formula. So magnesium and chlorine. Find Mg, magnesium on the periodic table, and find Cl, chlorine. Figure out the ions first and write them out. So magnesium is +2, chlorine is -1, which means I'm going to need 2 chlorines to balance, and the formula is going to be MgCl2. Okay, sulfur and aluminum, a little bit different. I did something a little bit different here. First, find sulfur and aluminum on the periodic table. So sulfur is -2 and aluminum is +3. But remember that the cation has to go first. So the first thing I would do is then swap them around. Put aluminum first with its +3 and sulfur with a -2. If we crisscross, the 3 is going to be the subscript on sulfur. The 2 is going to be the subscript on aluminum. So you get Al2S3, and that is the formula. You can also see that you get the same formula by adding everything together. If you were to have 2 aluminums, each with +3, the overall cation charge, all the pluses together would add up to +6. So to make all the minuses add up to -6, you'd need -2 3 times from sulfur. So you'd need 3 sulfurs to balance out 2 aluminums everything adds up to 0, and it gives you Al2S3. So both ways get you to the same exact formula. For naming ionic compounds, the rules are, again, the cation comes first, and it is just the name of the metal. The anion comes second, and we take the name of the element and change the ending to "ide," so to name the anion. So for example, we've got calcium and bromine. The metal comes first, and that's just calcium, and then the name bromine is changed to bromide. So for practice, the atoms that are given, figure out what ions they're going to make, put their formulas together, and then name them. Go ahead and stop the podcast, try these out, and then turn it back on to check your answers. So again, for each element, find it on the periodic table, use the group to figure out the charge, put them together to make a formula, and then name them, changing the ending of the anion to "ide." And then the ending is changed so that it's easy to say. So oxygen becomes oxide. Nitrogen becomes nitride. However it's easiest to say is usually going to be the right way to change it. So on your worksheets, you're given here a list of formulas. You're going to write the names, and then a list of names. You're going to write the formulas. Again, stop the tape, go through and do the work, and then turn it back on and check your answers. Okay, so moving on to formulas. Again, stop, go through. There isn't a whole lot of room here, so you might want to use some scrap paper, but make sure that you first write the ions and then put them together to make the formula. It's okay to write it twice. You don't have to do it all in your head, and if you need scratch paper, then use it. Okay, so now you're ready to do the quest homework, and definitely see your instructor if you're having any problems with any of these formulas.